Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the results from the Washington primary. This primary occurred last Tuesday. I'll be talking about them, what they mean, and more specifically, why this primary might be the best indicator of what is coming in November. Now, before I get into any of that, as of right now, we are around 30, I think we're 35 subscribers away from hitting 8,000. If you're not already subscribed, please do that. It really does help me out. Again, this is a small channel. I'm the only one who runs this channel. And again, just to make my quick pitch, subscribing helps the algorithm recommend my videos more, so more people see it, and that helps me out a great amount. Now, I'm sure you've heard that pitch many times from me and other people on YouTube, so I'll keep it short. But let's talk about this race. Let's talk about what happened in Washington. So Washington holds every 2 years, in the midterms and the presidential election, they hold a jungle primary where, whether you're a registered Democrat, Republican, Independent, or a third party, Libertarian, Green, etc., you are given the same ballot and you have all the options. As you can see, you have, let's say you're looking at the Senate ballot, you've got a Democrat, you've got Republicans, you've got independents, you've got people nonpartisan, you even have Socialist Workers Party. 7,000 people got to vote for the Socialist Workers Party for Senate in Washington. So you have a great diversity of options here on this ballot, right? But you get to vote for one. So it's not like you vote in a Democratic primary, you vote in a Republican primary. You get to vote for one candidate in a big primary, and the top two people go to the final round. So in Washington, it's already been called. Maria Cantwell, the incumbent Democratic senator, got a pretty big majority of the vote here. Washington's a blue state. She'll be reelected in November. Again, Biden won the state by 19. Cantwell won by, I think, a similar amount when she most recently ran for reelection. And the Republican Raul Garcia, congratulations to him for getting to the second round. But again, he's very likely to lose to Cantwell in November, probably by a good amount. It won't be very close either. So that's how the primary works. Now, what's interesting about this is that we don't really, because in other states, right, we can look at the primary turnout. We can say, well, 800,000 people voted in the Democratic primary and 850,000 people voted in the Republican primary. So that means Republicans had a better turnout statewide. But that doesn't really mean a lot because in some cases, let's say the Republican primary is super competitive. You have two candidates. We don't know who's going to be the nominee. The Democrats just have an incumbent who everyone knows is going to be the nominee, right? Like so many other factors that go into that. Whereas in this primary, we're all on one ballot. It's kind of like a pseudo-general election. So we kind of get a peek into what the electorate thinks when we combine the votes. So Democrats here, there's one other Democrat along with Cantwell. They combined for 58.5% of the vote. And then some people like to throw in the Socialist Workers voters along with the Democratic voters. You can do that. But either way, 59% of the vote for Democrats rounding up. It's closer if you include the Henry Dennison, the Socialist Workers person. But I'm just going to say 58.5 rounded up is 59. Then Republicans combined for around 39, I believe. So again, the 22 from Garcia, and then you have another kind of grand total of 11.3% there, and then you have another 4.5%. So as you can see, I already did the math beforehand, but it's in the 39% ballpark for what I can remember. So Democrats won this Senate primary by a little over 19 points. 19 points was the margin in this primary. That's a big amount, and we'll talk about what that means later. But 19 is a big amount, and you might be thinking, well, obviously they won it by 19. Washington's a blue state, and Biden won Washington by 19 points in 2020. And that's true. Washington is a blue state, and it's going to go blue in 2024. Harris is going to win it at the top of the ticket, and Cantwell's going to win re-election. Now, here's the thing. Directionally, Washington does swing with the country, and this primary is, many believe it's the best indicator of where the country is. Because in 2018, we saw Democrats win this primary, the popular vote in I believe, the Senate primary by around 20 points. So Cantwell is kind of matching. She's doing a bit of point worse than her 2018 margin. In 2020, they won it by, I think, 13 or 14. So there wasn't a Senate primary, but there were House primaries that year. And Democrats won those primaries by a combined total of, I think, 13 or 14 points. So they did well, but not necessarily as well as 2018. And that was reflected in 2020. Nationally, Democrats did 4% worse in 2020 than 2018. 2018 was a blue wave midterm. 2020 was a Democratic-leaning year. Democrats were broadly favored throughout the country, but it wasn't a wave year, but the way 2018 was. And then in 2022, Democrats won by, I think, 12. So again, the primary swung another 2 points towards the Democrats. The country as a whole, in terms of House popular vote, when you compare House popular vote from 2020 to 2024, it got about 4% redder. Presidentially, if you move that, it got about, I think, 6% redder. So Washington swung right by a bit less than the country as a whole, but it was still directionally correct. So every year, the way Washington moves is the way the country moves. And this year, for the first time since 2018, Washington moved more towards the Democrats. this race got bluer. And that's interesting to watch. That is very interesting to watch because, again, if we were truly in an environment where the election is favoring Trump, you would expect this primary to be maybe an 11, 12, 13-point victory when you combine all the totals up, add them all up for Democrats. It was a 19-point victory for Cantwell and the other Democrat who ran in this race. So that is a very good sign for Democrats. But to be fair, the Senate race was a pretty good showing for Democrats. And in other races, they did a bit worse. Governor's race is kind of a whole other ballgame. We'll talk about that in a second. But in the more generic races where people kind of just, often people don't know who their candidate for Secretary of State or Attorney General is, they kind of just check the box for whoever. And again, in the Lieutenant Governor race, Democrats got, as you can see here, 58% of the vote. Republicans got around 42%. So they won by 16 there. Attorney General, similar thing. Democrats got 58% of the vote. Republicans got just under 42, so another 16-point victory. Then it kind of does the math for you. With other statewide races, Jones Commissioner, I know Democrats won that race by around 17, and then Secretary of State, they won it by 16, as they did the other race. Now, there is an interesting result in the going on the Public Lands Commissioner election, where a bunch of Democrats ran, 2 Republicans ran, and the Jamie Herrera Butler, who was the representative from Washington's 3rd District, she was a Republican. She lost her primary to Joe Kent in 2022. And if you remember, Joe Kent in 2022 lost that district, which is a Trump district, to a Democrat named Marie Gluesenkamp Perez. So there's a lot of different names going around here. But Butler was representative in Congress. She lost her primary. She's running for lands commissioner. And here's the thing. She's likely to advance to the final round. But there's another Republican who's only a couple thousand votes behind Dave Upthegrove, who is a Democrat with a very interesting last name. But he could actually get locked out. So we could see a Republican versus Republican race in Washington for the Lands Commissioner election, even though they're going to only combine for around 43% of the vote. So that's very interesting to watch in that. But the good news for Democrats is that this is a relatively inconsequential position, and it does look like right now Dave Upthegrove is going to narrowly by the skin of his teeth get that second place spot, and then the Democrat, if he's the nominee, he'll likely beat Butler in this race, although it could be a little closer. But regardless, just to kind of put that out there, that could be interesting. But again, this race doesn't really matter a ton. It's just a kind of a political, kind of a weird thing that happens sometimes where you have a lockout when it really shouldn't happen. And, that's what we're dealing with here. So, but regardless, the average Democrat, take the average of all these races. Democrats won in Washington by 16 points. In the Senate race, they won by 19. So on average, the Senate race is usually the most important, most predictive. But again, in other races, they won by 16, so it's kind of between that 16 and 19 range. And so the general barometer for if a year is red, neutral, or blue, if it's red, it's usually a 10, 11-point victory for Democrats in Washington. If it's blue, it's maybe a 16, 17-point victory, which is what we're looking at right now. Neutral is kind of a 13, 14-point victory. In 2022, it was 12, and that was actually very accurate because the year was it was close to neutral, but it was a tilt red year, I would say, and it was, again, a shade. The primary was 12 points for 12-point margin victory for Democrats, So that kind of lines up perfectly with that. But again, just looking at kind of the consensus that was made before the primary, if you told people that Democrats were going to win the Senate race or the Senate vote by 19 and the other races by 16, 17 points, that would be a very good result for Democrats. And that would be kind of matching what they saw in 2018. And so again, I'm not going to argue that this, primary indicates that we're going to see a blue wave, because there are dynamics that, definitely help Democrats here, like the fact that they are more energized right now than Republicans. We know this because of response bias to the polls. Kamala Harris is now the Democratic nominee, so that means that she has kind of energized the Democratic base. So maybe Democrats are more motivated to turn out in an August election. That might not, hold up until November. We'll see. All that applies. Again, don't use this as your sole indicator of what's happening. But what you should do is note that this is the bluest Washington's primary has been since 2018. And directionally, it's been correct every year going back to the beginning of the 2010s, right? So those are two very good signs for Democrats. And a lot of very smart people, a lot of, good political scientists, a lot of people who, I follow on Twitter/X, whatnot, right? Like a lot of people who do good analysis have come to this conclusion as well as I have. So something to keep in mind as we go forward. But now I want to spend the final few minutes of this video talking about 2 House races that I want to look at. So it's kind of a part 1, part 2 video. The majority of the video was spent talking about, why this primary is a good sign for Democrats and how it's historically been predictive of the results. But now, if you are still around, let's talk a little bit about 2 competitive House races that I have, outlined a little bit for you. So let's go first to the 8th congressional district, where we have Kim Schreier, who is I believe it's actually Kim Schreier. I think someone told me that a few years ago, back in 2022. Yes, so Kim Schreier, excuse me, um, is the incumbent Democrat here. She won by 6 points in 2020. This is a Biden +7 district. And we saw a very good showing for Democrats here. They combined for 54.5% of the vote, Republicans 45.5%, so Democrats won this by 9, which is very interesting again, because this seat voted for Biden by 7. So Democrats not only did well here, but they did better than Biden. And Biden did exceptionally well in this district. This is it's the suburbs of Seattle. It's very educated. It's pretty white. It's not a particularly racially diverse district. Obviously, you do have, I believe, a good chunk of Asian voters in the King County portion, which is the most progressive / liberal part of the district. But again, something you got to remember here is that this district, again, is kind of your classic, suburban, left trending seat. It's one of the most generic, I'd say, just examples of Democrats improving in suburbs across the country. And they won by 9. This is the best margin Schreier and the Democrats have ever gotten here. And it's very likely she's going to win in November. Because again, in 2022, I think she was ahead of Republicans. She did reasonably well, but she was only up, I think, a point or so. I think maybe 2 points when you added up all the Democrats. Now she's up by 9 when you add in these other 2 candidates here. So that's something to keep in mind. That's a good sign for Democrats. This seat, again, was kind of thought to be competitive in 2022. Voted for Kim Schreier by more than expected. It's kind of now off the board really for Republicans. Not something not particularly interesting, but it's kind of locks it down for Democrats. Now, the truly competitive district here is the 3rd. So this is the district I mentioned earlier. The Jamie Hura Butler, who is now running for Lands Commissioner. She was the representative from this district. It's about a Trump +4 seat, so it's red, but only moderately. So it's not like a deep red district, I would say. Now, she was the Republican representative here. She was relatively popular. She always won her elections by pretty good amounts. And she lost in the jungle primary to Joe Kent, who, as you can see here, is the nominee again. Now, Joe Kent is a very right-wing candidate. He, engaged in a lot of the, arguments that Trump made about election denialism and, things like that, about how the 2020 election was stolen, things that we know to not be true. And that hurt him. And in the final weeks of 2022, Democrats, admittedly, I had this race going Republican, so I was very surprised when they went for Democrats in the midterms. But Democrats started to kind of see the weakness that Kent had here in the final weeks, and they, invested in Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez, and Perez won by, I believe, 2,000 votes in 2022. Now, Perez now is running for re-election, but she's doing so in a Trump district, and this time it's a presidential election, so she has a very tough lift here. Now, if we take a look at the votes, she got 46%, Kent got 39%, so it's going to be a Kent versus Perez rematch. Now, here's the interesting thing. Here's the thing here, right? Republicans won the vote in 2022 by a lot, but a lot of that came from the fact that a lot of Democrats crossed over to vote for Jamie Hura Butler because they didn't want Joe Kent. But Butler lost, and those Democrats in November, they all voted for Perez. This time, though, there's no moderate Republican on the ballot. Leslie Llewellyn, who's pretty unknown, is, I guess, more moderate than Joe Kent, so maybe some Democrats voted for her, but it's likely that it's just mostly Republicans. So Perez is in a weak spot here because she only got 46% of the vote. Unlike 2022, most Democrats are backing her outright in the primary. So she's going to have to get to 50% in a two-way race somehow, and that's going to be difficult. Now, let's say she wins the independents voters, right? So let's say she gets to 48.5. You can never assume that she'll win 100% of the independents. I think she'll win the majority, but not 100%. So let's say she's, at 48.5% generously. She needs to win like 15 to 20% of the GOP voters, or the voters, for Leslie Llewellyn. Now, is that possible? Sure. And in 2022, she won a lot of people who voted for Jamie Hura Butler. But again, you have to remember, a lot of those people were Democrats to begin with and just voted for her to kind of keep Kent out. It could be a tougher lift this time. We do know that Perez did outrun Cantwell. If you go to the Senate primary, she outran Cantwell in a lot of these counties. In some of them, I think she kind of ran even, but in others, she ran ahead. But, this is going to be a tough race for her. It really is, because she would have liked to be at maybe 47, 48, 48.5% of the vote to be kind of the lean. I would have put this race in lean D if she got to 48% of the vote, because she would have just been able to win over 2% more, which I think she can do. But now she's in a tough spot. I think that she'll come close to winning. I don't really have a firm take on this race yet. I really need to look at it more because this is going to be so close. But Democrats, I think, on a very good night, they did well in the 8th district. They did well statewide. It's a good night for them. in terms of how Washington compares to the general electorate. This district, I think, could have been better for them. So this is definitely a seat to watch. Republicans could pick it up. Now, Joe Kent by no means is a good candidate. If it were any other Republican, I think this would be pretty firmly in the lean to likely Republican column, and Perez would kind of be in a very clear underdog, but it's still functionally a toss-up just because Joe Kent is that bad of a candidate. So it really comes down to what percentage of people who voted for Leslie Llewellyn are going to vote for Marie Gluesenkamp Perez. If Perez can get 20% of these voters who voted for Llewellyn, then she'll probably win. If not, it will be hard for her to win re-election. Now, another thing you have to consider here is that there are people who maybe didn't vote in the primary because they forgot to or because they didn't care. We're going to vote in November. A lot of people do that. Primaries obviously have lower turnout than general elections, so that could be a whole nother animal we have to consider as we get close to Election Day. But just want to talk a little bit about that, keep you all informed, do some good, hopefully, can't do my own horn here, hopefully good analysis on these two congressional districts in Washington as a whole. But broadly, this is good news for Democrats. I think they should view this as a good sign. It shouldn't be the only reason that if you're predicting a Kamala Harris win, you should be predicting a Kamala Harris win. But this is the number one indicator of how elections go, and it looks good for the Democrats come November. Now, again, let me know what you want to see from the channel going forward. I already got a suggestion. I think a video from about Pennsylvania. I'll be working on that very soon. But again, hope to see you all next time. And we're very close to 8,000, so please do subscribe.